In rural Kentucky, cornfields stretch beyond the horizon. The nearest neighbor might be a mile away. Folks have always understood that some things are better left alone. They know when to turn off the porch light. They know when to keep the shotgun loaded. They understand that silence after dark can mean many things, but it rarely means safety. What happened on a small farm outside Hopkinsville in August 1955 changed everything. It challenged what these people thought they knew about their quiet corner of the world. 7 adults and 4 children found themselves under attack by creatures that made no sense. The attack lasted nearly 4 hours. By morning, the story had spread across 3 counties. Reporters came from far away. Government people came asking questions. But the strangers who came learned something strange. Every witness told the same story, down to the smallest detail. Even the children described the same creatures with perfect accuracy. No mix-ups, no changes to the story. Just the same scary account repeated 11 times over. The farm belonged to Glennie Lankford. She was a widow who had raised 8 children on the property after her husband died young. By 1955, most of her children had grown and moved away, but the house still buzzed with activity. Her daughter Lucky lived there with her husband, Billy Ray Taylor. Lucky's children from a previous marriage called the place home too. The property sat several miles outside Hopkinsville. Narrow country roads connected it to town. The roads wound through tobacco fields and patches of woodland. Billy Ray worked odd jobs around the county. Lucky managed the household. They were quiet people who minded their own business. They expected others to do the same. The farm had been in the Lankford family for 2 generations. Nothing unusual had ever happened there. No ghost stories, no strange lights, no mysterious visitors. Just the ordinary rhythms of rural life. On the 21st of August, 1955, the family had gathered for Sunday dinner. Lucky's brother Elmer Sutton had driven down from Evansville with his wife Vera and their children. Billy Ray's friend J.C. Taylor had stopped by with his wife and kids. The house was full of conversation and laughter. The adults caught up while the children played in the yard. Billy Ray stepped outside around 7 that evening to fetch water from the well. The sun was setting behind the tree line. Long shadows stretched across the yard. As he worked the pump handle, a strange object caught his attention in the western sky. It appeared to be some kind of craft. It glowed with a metallic shine. It moved in a way that seemed impossible. The object came down silently beyond a grove of trees, about a quarter mile from the house. Billy Ray watched for several minutes. Then the object disappeared behind the tree line. He mentioned it to the others when he came back inside, but no one paid much attention. Farm life offered plenty of distractions. Dinner needed finishing. Children needed tending. The adults were more interested in family gossip than mysterious lights in the sky. An hour later, the dogs began acting strangely. They whined and paced nervously around the yard. Then they retreated under the front porch. The family owned several hounds that normally announced every visitor with loud barking. These dogs feared nothing. They had tangled with raccoons, possums, and even the occasional wildcat without backing down. But something had spooked them badly. Lucky was in the kitchen washing dishes when she heard Billy Ray and Elmer talking in urgent whispers on the front porch. She dried her hands and stepped outside to see what had captured their attention. Both men were staring toward the tree line. Their faces were tense with worry. "You see that?" Billy Ray asked, pointing to a spot near the edge of the woods. Elmer nodded slowly. "Looks like someone walking around out there." Lucky squinted into the gathering darkness. At first, she saw nothing unusual. Then a figure emerged from behind a large oak tree. It was moving toward the house with an odd, gliding motion. The figure appeared to be small, perhaps the size of a child, but its shape seemed wrong somehow. As the creature drew closer, the family could make out more details. It stood about 3.5 feet tall. It had an oversized head that seemed too large for its thin body. Its skin appeared to have a metallic shine. It looked almost silvery in the fading light. Large, round eyes took up most of its face. The eyes glowed with a yellowish light that seemed to come from within. The creature moved without making any sound. Its feet didn't appear to touch the ground. Instead, it seemed to float just above the earth. It swayed slightly as it approached. Long, thin arms hung at its sides. The arms ended in clawed hands that looked more like talons than fingers. Billy Ray grabbed his 20-gauge shotgun from beside the door. Elmer got a .22 rifle from his truck. Both men had been hunting since childhood. They knew how to handle guns. They weren't easily scared by wildlife. But this was unlike anything they had ever seen. "What the hell is that thing?" Elmer whispered. Before Billy Ray could answer, the creature stopped about 50 yards from the house. It raised one clawed hand as if greeting them. Then it opened its mouth and made a sound unlike anything the family had ever heard. The noise sounded like a baby's cry mixed with fingernails on a chalkboard. The sound seemed to come from multiple directions at once. It created a disturbing echo effect. Billy Ray raised his shotgun and fired. The blast echoed across the farm. A metallic ringing sound followed immediately as the pellets struck their target. The creature spun backward and fell to the ground. But instead of lying still, it began to glow more brightly. Within seconds, it rose to its feet. It glided back toward the tree line at incredible speed. "I know I hit it," Billy Ray said, his voice shaking. "Dead center." Elmer fired his rifle at the retreating figure. The bullet appeared to strike the creature. It produced the same metallic ringing sound, but it had no visible effect. The entity disappeared into the woods without showing any signs of injury. The men stood in stunned silence for several moments. Lucky had retreated into the house. She called for the others to stay inside and lock the doors. The children were crying. They were frightened by the gunshots and their parents' obvious distress. "Maybe it was just someone playing a prank," Elmer suggested, but his voice carried no confidence. Billy Ray shook his head. "No person moves like that, and those eyes." He trailed off. He couldn't find words to describe what he had seen. The family gathered in the living room to discuss what had happened. Glennie Lankford, the family matriarch, had lived through the Great Depression and 2 wars. She was not easily frightened. But the look on her son-in-law's face convinced her that something serious was happening. "We should call the police," she said. Before anyone could respond, one of the children screamed from the kitchen. Lucky rushed to investigate. She found her youngest son pointing out the window toward the backyard. Another creature was standing near the chicken coop. It appeared to be examining the building with curious interest. This entity appeared identical to the first one. Same size, same glowing eyes, same metallic skin. It moved with the same floating motion. It never quite touched the ground. As the family watched from the window, it reached out with one clawed hand. It touched the wire fence surrounding the chicken coop. The chickens went berserk. They squawked and flapped wildly. They tried to escape from whatever presence had invaded their space. Several birds flew directly into the fence in their panic. The impact stunned them. Others simply collapsed as if paralyzed by fear. Billy Ray grabbed his shotgun and headed for the back door. Elmer followed with the rifle. They moved carefully through the kitchen. They tried not to alert the creature to their presence. When they reached the door, Billy Ray slowly turned the handle and pushed it open. The creature was now standing directly beneath the kitchen window. It was no more than 20 feet away. In the light spilling from the house, they could see it clearly for the first time. Its head was completely hairless. It seemed to be covered with some kind of metallic skin that reflected light like polished silver. The eyes were enormous. They took up most of the upper portion of its face. They glowed with a steady yellow light. But the most disturbing feature was its hands. The fingers were impossibly long and thin. They ended in what appeared to be razor-sharp claws. As they watched, the creature raised one hand. It pointed directly at the window where Lucky and the children were peering out. Billy Ray fired without hesitation. The blast caught the creature center mass. It lifted the entity off its feet and threw it backwards several yards. But just like before, it began to glow more brightly. It rose to its feet within seconds. This time, however, it didn't retreat. Instead, it began moving toward the house with increased speed. "Get away from the window!" Billy Ray shouted to his wife. Elmer fired his rifle. Then he quickly worked the bolt to chamber another round. The bullet struck the creature in the head with a sound like hitting a metal pot with a hammer. The entity stumbled, but kept coming. Both men retreated into the house and slammed the door. Billy Ray threw the deadbolt. Elmer dragged a heavy kitchen table against the entrance. Through the window, they could see the creature circling the house. It appeared to be looking for another way inside. "There's more of them," Lucky whispered from the living room. The family rushed to the front windows. They saw 3 more creatures emerging from the woods. They moved in formation, like soldiers advancing on an enemy position. 2 approached from the left side of the house. The 3rd came straight up the middle. The children were crying openly now. Glennie Lankford gathered them in the center of the living room, away from the windows. J.C. Taylor had gotten a pistol from his car. He stood guard at the front door. His wife, Aline, held their baby close to her chest. She whispered prayers. One of the creatures appeared at the living room window. It pressed its face against the glass. It left streaks of some kind of glowing residue. Up close, its features were even more disturbing. The skin had a texture like wet metal. The eyes seemed to look through rather than at the family. There was an intelligence there, but it was utterly alien. Billy Ray fired through the window, shattering the glass. The creature fell backward but was on its feet again within moments. It began making the same horrible crying sound they had heard earlier. The other entities immediately answered with identical calls. The sound was unbearable. It seemed to penetrate not just the ears but the mind itself. It created a sensation of panic that went beyond normal fear. Several of the children began screaming and covering their ears. Even the adults found it difficult to think clearly, while the creatures continued their vocal assault. "We need to get out of here," Elmer said. "Where can we go?" Lucky asked. "They're all around us." Through the broken window they could see that more creatures had arrived. At least 7 entities now surrounded the house. Some perched on the roof, others stood in the yard. They seemed to be communicating with each other through a series of gestures and that terrible crying sound. One creature climbed onto the front porch. It began scratching at the door with its claws. The sound of metal on wood sent shivers through everyone in the house. Another entity appeared at the kitchen window. It tapped on the glass with one elongated finger. Billy Ray and Elmer took turns firing at any creature that came close to a window or door. They had plenty of ammunition, but their shots seemed to have no permanent effect. The entities would fall when hit. They would glow brightly for a few seconds. Then they would rise and continue their assault. "It's like they're made of metal," Elmer observed after landing what should have been a killing shot on one of the creatures. The siege continued for hours. Every time the family thought the creatures had given up and left, another one would appear at a window or on the roof. They could hear metallic footsteps moving back and forth overhead. Occasionally they heard scratching sounds as claws dug into the wooden shingles. Around midnight, the activity seemed to increase. All of the creatures were now making the crying sound in unison. They created a cacophony that made normal conversation impossible. The noise was so loud that it seemed to vibrate through the walls and floor. Then, suddenly, everything went quiet. The family waited in terrified silence for several minutes. No sounds from the roof, no faces at the windows. Even the dogs had stopped whimpering. Billy Ray carefully approached the front window and peered out into the yard. Nothing. The creatures had vanished as mysteriously as they had appeared. "Maybe they're gone," Lucky whispered. Elmer shook his head. "Or maybe they want us to think they're gone." The family spent the rest of the night huddled in the living room. They took turns standing watch. Nobody slept. Every sound outside sent waves of tension through the group. From a rustling leaf to a nightbird's call, everything scared them. As dawn approached, they finally worked up the courage to look outside. The yard appeared normal except for several strange impressions in the dirt where the creatures had been standing. The marks were perfectly round. They were about 6 inches across. They appeared to have been burned into the earth. Billy Ray and Elmer ventured outside to examine the evidence more closely. They found similar marks all around the house. They were particularly common near the windows and doors where the creatures had lingered. The grass in these areas had been flattened in perfect circles. It looked as if something heavy had hovered just above the ground. At the chicken coop, they discovered that several birds had died during the night. The chickens showed no signs of injury or disease. They had simply died. Apparently from shock or fear, the survivors huddled in the corners of the coop. They refused to come out even when offered food. The family drove into Hopkinsville that morning to report the incident to the police. Chief Russell Greenwell listened to their story with obvious doubt. Mass hysteria, he suggested. Maybe someone playing an elaborate prank. But when the entire family insisted on the same details, his attitude began to change. Greenwell drove out to the farm with several officers to investigate. They found the burn marks exactly as described. They interviewed each family member separately. They got identical accounts. The children's descriptions matched those of the adults perfectly, down to minor details like the creature's floating movement and metallic skin. Word of the incident spread quickly through the county. By evening, reporters from Louisville and Nashville had arrived to interview the family. Radio stations picked up the story. Newspapers across the country followed. Within days, the Hopkinsville Goblins had become national news. Investigators came from universities and government agencies. They measured the burn marks. They photographed the damaged chicken coop. They interviewed everyone who had been present. Some suggested the family had encountered visitors from another world. Others proposed more conventional explanations. These included optical illusions, misidentified wildlife, or elaborate hoaxes. But none of the conventional explanations addressed the most puzzling aspects of the case. How had 11 people, including small children, maintained perfect consistency in their accounts? Why had their gunshots produced metallic ringing sounds? What had created the burn marks in the yard? The investigation that followed the incident revealed details that made the case even more puzzling. Dr. Joseph Allen Hynek arrived in Hopkinsville 3 days after the encounter. He was an astronomer working with the Air Force's Project Blue Book. He spent nearly a week interviewing witnesses. He examined the physical evidence. Hynek had investigated hundreds of UFO reports. He was known for his scientific doubt. He expected to find obvious signs of hoax or wrong identification. Instead, he discovered what he later called one of the most believable multiple witness cases in his files. The doctor was particularly impressed by how consistent the children's accounts were. 8-year-old Lonnie Lankford described the creature's eyes as big and yellow like car headlights. His 6-year-old sister gave an identical description using almost the same words. Neither child had been coached. They were interviewed separately. Hynek also noted that the family had called the police immediately after the incident. This was before any media attention. This contradicted the typical pattern of hoax cases. In those cases, publicity usually came before official reports. The Suttons and Lankfords seemed genuinely reluctant to discuss their experience with outsiders. The physical evidence proved equally intriguing. Soil samples from the burn marks showed unusual mineral compositions. These couldn't be explained by conventional means. The affected areas contained traces of elements not naturally found in Kentucky soil. They included minute quantities of rare earth metals. These metals are typically associated with meteorite impacts. A metallurgist from the University of Louisville examined bullet fragments recovered from the farmyard. Several pellets from Billy Ray's shotgun showed signs of impact with an extremely hard surface. The deformation patterns were consistent with striking steel or some other metal, not the soft tissue of any known animal. Local veterinarian Dr. William Morrison examined the dead chickens. He found no obvious cause of death. The birds showed no signs of disease, injury, or poisoning. Their hearts had simply stopped beating, apparently from extreme stress. Morrison had never seen healthy livestock die from fear alone, at least not in such numbers. The Kentucky State Police conducted their own investigation, under the direction of Captain James Bird. Bird was a career officer known for his methodical approach to criminal cases. He treated the Hopkinsville incident like any other crime scene. He documented everything with photographs and detailed measurements. The captain's report noted unexplained circular impressions in the farmyard dirt. Each mark measured exactly 6 inches across. They appeared to have been created by intense heat applied from above. Laboratory analysis later revealed something shocking. The soil in these areas had been exposed to temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Perhaps most puzzling was the trajectory analysis of the gunshots fired during the encounter. Ballistics experts determined that Billy Ray and Elmer had fired at least 50 rounds during the 4-hour siege. Based on the witnesses' descriptions of where they aimed, every shot should have been fatal to a human-sized target at that range. Yet no blood was found anywhere on the property. No bodies. No evidence that any creature had been wounded despite multiple direct hits. The metallic ringing sounds described by the witnesses suggested their bullets had struck something extremely hard. But what that something might have been remained a mystery. The case attracted attention from unexpected quarters. Military personnel from Fort Campbell arrived to conduct their own investigation. Fort Campbell was located about 30 miles south of Hopkinsville. They interviewed the family members privately. They collected soil samples from the burn marks. The soldiers were tight-lipped about their findings, but neighbors reported seeing unmarked vehicles patrolling the area for several weeks after the incident. Some locals claimed to have spotted military helicopters circling the farm at low altitude. They appeared to be searching for something. Meanwhile, the media coverage was taking its toll on the family. Reporters camped out in the farmyard. They offered money for exclusive interviews. Curiosity seekers drove out from Nashville and Louisville. They hoped to catch a glimpse of the space invaders. The Suttons found themselves prisoners in their own home. The attention wasn't entirely welcome. Anonymous letters arrived daily. Some called the family liars and attention seekers. Others contained religious pamphlets warning of demonic activity. A few included death threats from people who believed the Hopkinsville incident was part of some elaborate communist plot to destabilize American society. Local reactions were mixed. Many longtime residents defended the Sutton and Lankford families. They pointed out their reputation for honesty and stability. But others worried that the publicity would damage Hopkinsville's image as a quiet, God-fearing community. The incident also divided the scientific community. Astronomers noted that the date coincided with the peak of the Perseid meteor shower. This might have contributed to the initial UFO sighting. But this explanation didn't account for the ground-based encounter with the creatures. Psychologists proposed various theories. These involved mass hysteria, shared delusions, and the power of suggestion. They pointed out that rural communities often generated folklore to explain unusual events. Perhaps the Hopkinsville Goblins were simply the latest chapter in humanity's long history of monster myths, but these theories struggled to explain the physical evidence. Shared delusions don't leave burn marks in the ground. They don't kill healthy chickens. Mass hysteria doesn't create bullet holes in trees. It doesn't deform metal fragments. Dr. Hynek eventually classified the case as unexplained in his official report to Project Blue Book. This designation was reserved for incidents that couldn't be attributed to known phenomena, despite thorough investigation. Out of thousands of reports examined by the project, fewer than 5% received this classification. The Air Force's interest in the case extended beyond mere scientific curiosity. During the Cold War, any unusual aerial activity near military installations was considered a potential security threat. Fort Campbell housed sensitive equipment and personnel. These could be targets for foreign intelligence operations. Military investigators explored the possibility that the creatures might have been foreign agents using some kind of advanced technology. The metallic appearance and apparent immunity to gunfire suggested sophisticated protective equipment. but no known military possessed such capabilities in 1955. Other government agencies also took notice. The FBI opened a file on the incident. Most of the contents remain classified even today. What little information has been released suggests federal agents were more concerned about public reaction than the creatures themselves. The case files reveal growing government concern about UFO reports and their potential impact on civilian morale. Military planners worried that widespread belief in extraterrestrial visitors might create panic. It might undermine confidence in national defense capabilities. These concerns weren't entirely theoretical. The 1938 radio broadcast of War of the Worlds had demonstrated how realistic fictional accounts of alien invasion could cause genuine public hysteria. Government officials feared that similar incidents might be exploited by hostile foreign powers. As months passed, the initial excitement surrounding the Hopkinsville incident began to fade. The Sutton and Lankford families gradually returned to their normal routines. Though they never fully escaped the attention of UFO researchers and curiosity seekers, Billy Ray and Lucky Taylor eventually sold their portion of the farm. They moved to a small town in Indiana. They rarely spoke about their experience. Billy Ray reportedly suffered from nightmares for years after the encounter. He would wake up screaming about glowing eyes and metallic creatures scratching at the windows. Elmer Sutton remained in Kentucky, but avoided the family farm whenever possible. He told friends that the place felt wrong somehow. It was as if the creatures had left some invisible mark on the property. Other family members reported similar feelings of unease when visiting the area. The farm itself began to acquire a reputation for strangeness. Neighboring farmers reported unusual animal behavior in the vicinity. Cattle would refuse to graze in certain areas. Dogs would bark at empty fields for no apparent reason. Even wild animals seemed to avoid the property. Local teenagers began using the farm as a test of courage. They dared each other to spend nights in the abandoned buildings. Most of these adventures ended with the young people fleeing in terror. They claimed to have seen glowing figures. They heard the same crying sounds described by the original witnesses. Professional investigators made periodic visits to document these secondary encounters. Some researchers established overnight monitoring stations. These were equipped with cameras, recording equipment, and radiation detectors. Their findings were inconclusive but intriguing. Several recording sessions captured unexplained sounds that matched the witnesses' descriptions of the creatures' vocalizations. Photographic evidence was more elusive, though a few images showed anomalous light sources that couldn't be attributed to known causes. The case also attracted international attention. European researchers familiar with folklore traditions noted similarities between the Hopkinsville creatures and entities described in medieval accounts of demonic encounters. Some suggested the incident might represent a modern manifestation of ancient supernatural phenomena. This interpretation gained support from historians studying the area's pre-Columbian past. Archaeological evidence indicated that Native American tribes had considered the region spiritually significant. Several burial mounds and ceremonial sites existed within a few miles of the Sutton farm. Some researchers theorized that the creatures might be guardians or spirits associated with these sacred places. This would explain their apparent immunity to physical harm and their eventual disappearance, but it didn't account for their distinctly mechanical appearance or the technological aspects of the encounter. The debate over what really happened in Hopkinsville continues today. New theories emerge regularly. They incorporate advances in physics, psychology, and technology. Each explanation addresses some aspects of the case, while leaving others unresolved. Recent interest has focused on the possibility of interdimensional visitors. Theoretical physicists now acknowledge that parallel universes might exist alongside our own reality. Perhaps the creatures came from a dimension where the laws of physics operate differently. This would allow them to survive gunshots and float above the ground. This theory would explain many of the encounter's puzzling aspects, including the creature's sudden appearance and equally sudden disappearance. It might also account for their apparent intelligence combined with their alien behavior patterns. But interdimensional travel remains purely theoretical. It exists only in the realm of mathematical equations and science fiction. Critics argue that invoking such exotic explanations is no different from attributing the incident to magic or divine intervention. The psychological impact of the Hopkinsville incident extended far beyond the immediate witnesses. The case helped establish patterns that would be repeated in countless later encounters with unexplained phenomena. The detailed descriptions, multiple witnesses, and physical evidence became templates for evaluating similar reports. The incident also influenced popular culture in ways that continue to resonate today. Science fiction writers incorporated elements from the Hopkinsville encounter into their stories. Hollywood filmmakers drew inspiration from the witnesses' descriptions when designing alien creatures for movies and television shows. But perhaps the most lasting legacy of the Hopkinsville Goblins lies in the questions they raised about the nature of reality itself. The case challenged fundamental assumptions about what was possible in our orderly scientific world. It suggested that mysteries might exist in the most ordinary places, waiting to shatter our comfortable certainties. The family never profited from their experience. They turned down offers from magazines and television shows. Billy Ray and Lucky eventually moved away from the farm. They couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The other family members scattered across the country, but they all maintained their version of events for the rest of their lives. Local residents developed their own theories about what had happened. Some believed the creatures were demons summoned by someone practicing witchcraft. Others thought they were the spirits of ancient Native Americans, angry about settlers disturbing sacred ground. A few suggested they were time travelers or beings from another dimension. The burn marks in the yard remained visible for months after the incident. Grass would not grow in the affected areas. The soil seemed to repel water. Eventually, the marks faded, but neighbors reported seeing strange lights in the area for years afterward. Scientists who studied the case found no evidence of hoax or deception. Lie detector tests administered to several family members produced no indication of dishonesty. Psychiatric evaluations found no signs of mental illness or shared delusion. The witnesses appeared to be normal, rational people who had experienced something genuinely extraordinary. But extraordinary experiences demand extraordinary evidence, and such evidence remained elusive. No photographs existed of the creatures. No physical remains were recovered. The only proof was the testimony of 11 people who insisted they had been attacked by beings from another world. Decades later, researchers continue to debate what really happened on that August night in Kentucky. UFO investigators point to Billy Ray's sighting of the strange object earlier in the evening. Skeptics focus on the lack of physical evidence and the fantastic nature of the claims. Folklorists see parallels with traditional goblin legends from European cultures. Or perhaps the real mystery isn't what the family saw that night, but what it revealed about the limits of human understanding. In a cosmos vast beyond imagination, filled with forces and phenomena we're only beginning to glimpse, how can we be certain that we know all there is to know about what shares this world with us? The truth may be something none of them have considered. Perhaps the creatures were exactly what the witnesses described. Perhaps the universe contains corners where the impossible becomes routine and the fantastic walks among us. Perhaps there are things in the darkness that our science cannot explain and our weapons cannot stop. If you enjoyed this story, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever encountered something that challenged your understanding of what's possible? Don't forget to subscribe for more tales that explore the mysteries lurking just beyond the edge of our everyday world.